Welcome to the Basecamp Community Podcast, hosted by your head coaches, Tim Cusick and me, Namrita Brooke. We discuss timely topics that you can apply to get the most out of your training and to learn to perform at your best. I am Namrita Brooke, Basecamp head coach and sports nutritionist. I've been coaching for over 15 years. I have a PhD in applied exercise physiology and a master's in sports nutrition, and I am also a registered dietitian.
My name is Tim Cusick. I'm the other head coach here at Base Camp. I've been coaching for over 20 years. I've had the luxury of coaching athletes to numerous world and national championships and to the Olympics.
We are back, baby.
We're back in podcast mode. It must be spring, right?
Yeah. We have had a busy winter. We just returned from Mallorca camp, and it's time to get in podcast mode. So today, we're gonna hit kind of a hot topic, and it's funny that it's a hot topic because it's not a new idea, and in my opinion, it's something that's sort of fundamental to racing and performance. And we, as coaches through Basecamp, have been building this concept of durability in our athletes for years, and we've been coaching athletes to improve what we have called fatigue resistance. People are now calling it durability for a long time. And it's funny, like I was thinking about this when we were outlining the topic, and when I was racing, like I didn't race with a power meter, and I didn't even, for a long time train with a power meter, but the concept of, you're going into a race and the race is going to start hard and it's also going to finish hard if you want to be competing. That's kind of how I approached it. And the concept of that, like starting hard and finishing hard and just racing the course and racing the other competitors on the course, that's sort of inherent. Like you need to have durability versus like the concept of pacing, right? Like, so it's you against a course, or you're doing this long ride where you want to pace yourself conservatively. So you're thinking about finishing strong, but maybe that means you're not going too hard too early. So now we're thinking about that. Like, what does it look in terms of metrics, and how do we quantify that concept of like you need to be able to have good numbers and like start hard, but also, be able to be strong at the end. So today, yeah, we're talking about the concept of durability and how that is different from the idea of fitness and peak numbers when we think of like somebody's power duration curve. Um, Tim, why, in your opinion, are people talking about this now? Why should we be talking about it?
Well, I think you make a great point. It's been talked about forever, I guess, in endurance sports. It's funny how the names change and concepts constantly recycle. I actually have a unique concept of why it has come back. So I'm going to put this on the table now and explain it later. I think why it's such a hot topic again now, and rightfully so, by the way. To me, this is probably the most impactful area on your performance that should be considered, trained, developed, worked on. And it really has been the evolution of nutrition. And I
Mhm.
know that might surprise some people of like, wow, why did he just go through nutrition? I think as you've seen in the last five, I don't know, call it seven, call it three, whatever years, where we've evolved the concepts of understanding fueling properly, we're reinvigorating these concepts of durability or fatigue resistance because there's an innate relationship between fueling, training, and performance that do work together. So pull back a step and let's just say, what is it? So
Mhm.
we tend to think in training terms of fitness, like, am I really fit? Fitness is a capacity. Fitness is a load expression. It's a fundamental ability, not fundamental, a learned or trained or taught ability, right? It's a capacity. Durability is a resistance, or maybe more specifically, the ability to resist things. Can I resist fatigue? Can I resist decline in power? Can I resist slowing? Right? Your pacing point of a couple of moments ago. So when we think about these two things, which, when it comes down to when we look at it, which are more important? Like, I always love to answer this question. I've discussed this a tremendous amount of times. When we think fitness, we tend to express that in FTP, sometimes in VO2 max, but generally in FTP. FTP is, and your fitness, your capacity is less important in performance than durability. Yeah, maybe fitness, that FTP number tells you kind of what you can race, but durability is actually the performance layer that will ultimately decide the outcome of how well you do. Simplest example to give, and then let's talk about what's in durability. But the simplest example, take two athletes with a 250-watt FTP and you put them on a 4-hour gravel race. Let's just use that as an example, but this could be true for any race. And they go out and race. They're equal and they should finish equal, right? Because they have the same fitness. But I
Yeah.
will absolutely tell you the physiological determinant between those two athletes will be durability. Which one's more durable? But here's a deeper point because you're going to listen to that and be like, well, no crap, Tim, that we know. If you took an athlete with a 250-watt FTP and another one with a 300-watt FTP and say, now they're going to race the same course, you're going to say, well, the 300-watt FTP person's going to win every time. Maybe not. I will tell you right now, an athlete with a high durability at 250 watts has a pretty good chance against a athlete with a 300-watt FTP with a low durability. As a matter of fact, if I analyze the data and I said, wow, this person's the 250 is very durable, and the 300-watt FTP really can hold that for about 25 minutes at best, and they're not durable, I'll bet on that 250 FTP athlete. I'll bet on them every time. Doesn't mean they'll win every time, but they'll probably win 4 to 5. So understand it's a great equalizer in ways. And it's funny, we chase FTP numbers as an equalizer where there's other ways when we start thinking in performance that can get us there.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, it's interesting, obviously I totally agree on the nutrition standpoint because if we think about where the focus of nutrition has been previously, it was more on like glycogen sparing and how can we be more efficient, um, not tapping into our glycogen stores, saving them for later. How can we be better at like fat oxidation, and not rely on carbohydrate oxidation? We've totally flipped that because now we know that carbohydrates can support and your fueling strategy can support this, and it is important for performance. Um, so that's the nutrition standpoint. Now, when we're looking at making the choice of what to focus on, I guess from a training standpoint, we have all these like months to train before we go into racing. Um, how how do you approach like, are we going to build FTP or are we going to build durability? Is it like a one or the other, or is it both? And how do you approach that with different types of athletes?
That's a great question. When we have these type of dialogues, it helps in the sense of clarity to separate things, but we are a physiological system, so everything's kind of interacting at the same time. Um, I would say if we think about why I say fitness, when we think about things like FTP, let's put FTP and VO2 max together. Um, they're a fitness measurement because they're let's call it a metabolic measurement. So I'm training and I'm gaining fitness. That to me tends to be more the focus of base training, of the winter, of what you're putting in place as your foundational work. I want to use base training with an athlete to improve fitness or improve capacity first. So that comes first because the answer to do I focus on one or the other is both. Timing to me is
Mhm.
the key. Now, once we have a certain amount of fitness and capacity, and I think this is a mistake a lot of self-coached and coached athletes will make, um, that focus doesn't change. We go through the foundation, we're moving FTP, maybe you are tracking VO2 max and they're both getting better. And you're like, this is cool. I'm validating myself because those numbers are going up and I feel good about my training. But there's a point where you have to shift from the concept from fitness or capacity building to performance or resistance capacities, like this ability to then actually take that fitness and move it into performance. When it comes down to most of today's, I mean, let's face it, we're racing gravel more, we are doing longer events as a whole. Durability is the key driver. So when you shift from that fitness phase to performance phase, you're shifting from raising FTP and VO2 max phase into improving durability phase, which is built on top of your fitness. The hard part there is you need to stop being married to FTP, like let it go. Like I
Mhm.
really want to, tell the world there. You probably are going to have some of your highest FTP performance coming out of your foundation phase, your FTP building, while you're working on those concepts. The problem, if you can't let it go, is um, if you're tracking FTP and VO2 max, but let's really focus on FTP, the performance of that becomes both the goal and the measurement.
Mhm.
And that's like a classic law. It's a classic mistake because at first you're building it and then it becomes the measurement of the success and it puts blinders on you for the things that you really want to accomplish. So my answer is build capacity throughout your foundational phase, throughout your winter or whenever you're doing that. Raise those capacities as high as possible as measured by FTP, VO2 max, and there's some other markers that you can use in there. Once that phase is over, excuse me, move on. Like now start looking at durability and the development of durability. That's challenging
Mhm.
because you have to think about the fact that what does it take to be a durable athlete? I get that question all the time. So I'm going to kind of just jump into answering it as one run on sentence as I do. Um, Durability is it's endurance training, but it's whole athlete approach. We have to think about this concept that it's the synchronization of three operating things, like three functions, three physiological functions happening at the same time. You need metabolic stability, neuromuscular control, and muscular resilience or resiliency. Any one of those three fails during long by performance efforts and stuff like that, you lose, like you're not durable.
Mhm.
So conceptually, you have to begin to think differently about the whole system approach towards what you're doing, what you're training, because you're no longer saying, I just want a fitness capacity. I'm working on FTP, this metabolic transition of LT2, this raising of that. You have a very metabolic focus in your early phases. And don't get me wrong, you have some neuromuscular and things. When you move into this phase, you need to think about those three because the failure of durability is not all three fails, it's when only one fails. So you need
Mhm.
all three of those things functioning together.
I can't help but thinking, like, just going back to, and not to like over promote how we coach in the winter, but we so much focus on these three elements just in terms of our foundation. Because when we think about training to train more, training to perform later, like we're building that fitness, we're building that capacity, but it's multifaceted. It's metabolic, it's neuromuscular, it's it's this combination of what you've laid out, and we do that as part of our foundation and building this 360-degree athlete. So it's the specific workouts and why do we work on, different cadence and fatigue resistance and why do we include strength and nutrition as builders to support this? It's because later when we are training this specific nature of durability, like we have to have those building blocks in place, right?
Yeah, and great point because you can't, like I said, we're a system. You're not separating and doing exactly just one and then nothing else is responding. So think about it in base training, you are 70, 80% fitness, 20 to 30% durability building because you need fitness is more the focus. Then when you flip the switch into the performance phase of your season, of your annual plan, of your periodization plan, whatever you're looking at, now you're 70 to 80% durability and 20 to 30% fitness that you're always working on too. But here's the major driver in mentality to me when you shift into performance training and durability becomes a focus.
Mhm.
Durability is a systems integration problem. Like, and a good coach will approach it like that. In the winter, when you're like, I'm kind of building, when you're doing your foundation, like, I just want FTP, which you should be more diverse based on what I just said about, the whole system. But you really are able to focus more in a singular direction, a more metabolic specific direction. When you come into durability, you must make these three systems work together. So it's like we tend to hear the conversation about durability just being like, I hear this a lot, just do more endurance training.
Mhm.
That's not true it's not a bad element of it, right? It's
Mhm.
something that can be part of durability, but it's not true in a standalone because it ignores the system integration problem because you need metabolic stability, neuromuscular control, and muscular resiliency. Those three have to operate. So you need training that one, you've done some small amount of building through your foundation phase, but now become crucial to your ability to truly develop durability in the system. And just to add, and it'll be interesting to hear your takes, this is why nutrition is so important because the only way you're going to build metabolic stability in a durable sense, and then the ability to be muscularly resilient, those two of the three keys, you must, and everybody record what I'm about to say, lock this into your brain, and everybody's going to cheer me on, I guarantee. You must fuel every workout correctly. The fueling itself is part of the adaptive signal and the response mechanism. If you take proper nutrition out of the workouts, you will not adapt. You'll be doing work that you think will make you more durable, but it won't. Because
Mhm.
without the fuel source there as part of the signal and the response, you're just going to be in a kind of a non-functional overreaching type
Mhm.
of environment. So that's a place where I'm saying now that we're figuring out nutrition better, we're actually
Mhm.
getting better results whether we connect the dots or not in our durability training because it's actually working because we're actually eating food enough to make it
Mhm.
work.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's so many misconceptions that still, are in that fueling piece when we think of what I said before about like we don't, we want to spare glycogen, we want to save that for the end when we need to like sprint at the end of the race. But, I think more and more people are starting to get and really take to heart that even in endurance riding, we are still using glycogen. We're still relying on carbohydrate. Like, yes, carbohydrates are essential for higher intensity efforts, but we're still using it as a major fuel source under aerobic conditions, when we're um, doing these longer endurance rides. So if we're not, and also carbohydrates, send a signal just in the way
Yes.
that training sends a signal. Carbohydrates send a signal, and the low carbohydrate availability does not send the signal that we want. So yes, there are people who are doing endurance exercise to just improve their cardiovascular fitness and they want to improve their ability to oxidize fat. That's a very different scenario from what we're talking about here, which is training to perform, training for durability. We have to maximize the signal and the response, and part of that is having adequate carbohydrates in the system when we need them in the right amounts. And the more you can, the longer you can stay out there and the more power
Yep.
you can produce, the more work you can do, like the more you feed your body the carbohydrates. And it's just this like this effect. The more you eat, the more you can do, and then the more that you need. And so it just keeps moving forward, which is why the pros are taking in over 120 grams of carbs an hour. They can do that work where they can actually like use the energy to do more work and then they need more. So it's more of just like we are acknowledging that the carbohydrates are not, they shouldn't be demonized as they have been in the past. It's not a bad thing, and it's actually a key piece of the puzzle and how you can keep moving forward. It's not just the training. You can have the perfect workouts and you can have like this, plan to improve your durability, but if you don't have the energy to do it, it's not going to come to fruition. Um, so yeah, I think it's clearly integrated as one of the key factors, but what about strength training? So it's
Yeah.
another element. We always think of, so we talked about nutrition now and durability. Strength training, again, like your body has to hold up. You have to be able to make the power. Um, it's it's that peripheral component, I guess.
Yeah, let's go back to something you just said on nutrition because it's so important. And then strength training. Remember what we're talking about: metabolic stability, neuromuscular control, muscular resilience. Those all break down. That's fatigue. I've got news for everybody. We tend to think about fatigue like a muscle fiber tires, right? I can't pedal anymore, or whatever. I can't swing my golf club one more, or whatever sport you're doing. We can fatigue is biochemical. So our ability to fuel that, to sustain, is part of the training response we want for durability training. For example, if you're doing every workout and you're riding out an endurance, and I'm keeping this very simple as an example, and you're doing 175 watts as your endurance target in the last hour and a half, you're fatiguing. So you drop down to 170 and then 165 and 155, whatever that number be, because you didn't eat enough and you fatigued. That's the signal you're sending. Like, you are literally reducing the signal. You are saying that this is what you want to teach your body to do.
Mhm.
Oversimplification alert, by the way. But the reason you want to fuel each and every workout is if you could do that 175 and finish at 175, or even add 5 watts late, now the signal is, wow, the fuel was available. I've used the fuel. Let's do more of that. Like,
Mhm.
that's what's happening in its very rudimentary way. That's why you need to fuel these to make it work. Then you add the element of strength. So strength is foundational to durability. And I think this is also part of what's enabling durability to work, because strength training is hot again. People are properly looking at it as a whole. You need a full strength program during that same foundation phase so you get strong enough. Because, and then you need, strength trainers hate this word, but a maintenance
Mhm.
phase, like as you're racing. Um, because your two things that break down. One is muscular resiliency. Most of us know that. You're just talking about peripheral fatigue and damage happening. You're like, yeah, my muscles are tired, right? In a simplified way. So when they're tired, they don't want to work as much. Again, a biochemical event, but another day for that. Um, but more, not, I wouldn't even say more importantly, but as important and underestimated constantly, is your neuromuscular control. What we don't think about a lot is that as we fatigue, and our body, our muscles, and our brain fatigues, we lose neuromuscular coordination, which means we have a down a downward trajectory of efficiency. Like, you as an athlete are more efficient in the first hour of your ride than you are typically in the last hour of your ride. So you're compounding problems when you're not more durable and you haven't trained with a strength basis. Strength, good winter strength basis, allows you to preserve that resiliency, just simply being stronger. But to me, almost more importantly, because of the decline of efficiency, it also allows you to do a better job of preserving that neuromuscular control. Two are the three key elements of durability. So, strength train through your foundation phase, strength maintenance throughout your race season phase. That will help you really have muscular resilience and control, and neuromuscular control, two of the three pillars of durability.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so important, and it is such an interesting topic. Maybe we get Menachem on our podcast again soon to talk more about that strength training component. Um, so let's talk about the overall plan and how, we tend to focus on like, okay, well, which workouts now? Oh, I'm sold. Like, I need to work on my durability. And, we think about like, oh, does that mean um, I move my intervals to late in the workout? Or does that mean that now I need to be doing 6 to 7 hour rides? Like, we always want to, we always tend to think of like, which workout is it going to be? And that's going to be like the magic to get me the most durability I can before my race in 6 weeks. So how do you think of an overall approach versus, yes,
Mhm.
workouts to some degree are important, but what is the big picture?
Yeah, because durability, it's not built in one special workout. Not that there aren't some, there are some types of workout concepts that we can use that can help, but
Yeah.
it's really about consistently asking your body to perform while in that quasi fatigue or a tired state, right? I'm kind of tired and I got to perform again. That is, when well controlled. I want to be cautious here. That is part of the response mechanism, the dose response mechanism that you're searching for here. So you have to be willing to train in a little more fatigue status. That means maybe giving up some peak power drives, some absolute bests, and nailing every workout because you need to introduce a little more fatigue in select blocks and microcycles, really, to be more specific. Um, when we begin to conceptualize this, though, it is good to begin to conceptualize it at the workout concept. A term that I use is that you need to stack the workout. What I mean by stacking is you need to have a nutrition goal in every workout in your durability phase. It's so funny when I say this, people will roll their eyes. Like you'll hear it and you'll be like, oh, screw that. I'm gonna eat a banana and some chips later. Um, the reality is you need to build in the right targeting, and it doesn't have to be exactly precise. If you're using concepts like hexis like we do, you'll have good guidance. But like 30 60 90 rule for when durability phase generally becomes 60 90 rule with me, meaning you're always targeting 60 or 90 in your durability microcycles, 30 on your active recovery days. So you're always putting something in. But understand what I'm saying, you must conceptualize it, stack it into the workout. Like it's got to be there. We'll have power targets all the time in workouts, but we don't
Mhm.
actually put that nutrition target in the workout. It's somewhere else. It's living off on the side. It's in my pocket. Um, think about that when you're looking at the concept of the workout to do, because, and I'm going to say it again, nutrition is part of the adaptive signal and what drives the response. So you need it for both. Um,
Well, one
I,
point on that, can I jump in?
yeah, please.
Uh, don't lose your thought. But, in terms of recovery, I think or nutrition, the recovery piece is so important when we're thinking about stacking. So it's not just like, okay, I need to nail Tuesday's workout, but you're thinking about the whole week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, assuming you have,
Mhm.
like we normally do, Friday easy. That recovery window is so key because it's not just what you're doing for nutrition and fueling on the bike. It's you have this window afterwards, and um, it's so important to how you're going to do in those subsequent workouts and how you're going to be able to stack those workouts. So if Tuesday is not perfect in the workout, so let's say maybe you underfuel a little bit, you still have an opportunity Tuesday after the workout heading into Wednesday to kind of redeem yourself and to still have a strong workout Wednesday. And again, remember, if the focus is not on, peak numbers and hitting like bests in every single workout. It's the focus is now how are you able to um, perform in all those workouts as they're stacked
Yeah.
together. That recovery piece is really, really important. I mean, I cannot emphasize that enough.
Yeah, and to me, so let's say you're doing a cycle, a 4 week cycle, right, of durability training, and when you look at each week, let's call that a microcycle for the discussion here. So in the microcycle, you want to stack or block. Block is, block training is a little more of the kind of common term, but here's the difference. You want to stack 3 or 4 workouts in a row of higher training stress or higher kilojoule. It's actually almost better here to track it in kilojoules because it'll better relate right back to your fueling and nutrition. But you want to stack 3 or 4 days of high TSS. I'm actually less concerned about the content. Like as long as it's not crazy intensity and some other, just um, let's just say not good common training. Um, what I do want is a high TSS load for those 3 or 4 days in a row compared to your normal TSS load. Like if you're training on a limited schedule and you're once a week or once every other week, your biggest ride is maybe 150 TSS. See if you can find a way to do a block at 125 every day for like 3 or 4 days in a row. That is the concept of, or maybe 150 if somehow you had vacation or whatever. This is why training camps can work, by the way. So you want to be operating each day. You want a high TSS load each day, or high kilojoule load each day compared to your peaks you might normally hit, and try to repeat that for 3 days in a row, maybe 4. That is why fueling in ride is so important and taking advantage of it, because what you're doing is you're your body always wants homeostasis. It wants to return, it wants this comfort, it wants to adapt to what you're doing. As soon as you're in this load where, wow, I'm maybe hitting 75 TSS a day and then occasional 150, and then you block three or four 125s to 150 in a row, that knocks you off homeostasis. That's part of the adaptive signal. Your body, it's a overstatement, but you go into allostasis. Your body's saying, oh, wow, there's change and I need to upregulate to this change really quickly, which will drive that response, that compensation to that change. So that concept of stacking or blocking and finding some ways to squeeze that into your durability, that's a high return response. Now, if you're a high volume training athlete who's has one ride a week above 200 TSS, 225 TSS, you need 4 or 5 days at 200 and 225 TSS. It should be relative to your training load. But I would also say, within caution, push that like you want in that block. You can squeeze out 10 extra TSS and survive, which if you eat well, you'll survive. Get
Mm.
that in those blocks. You want to repeat those stack or blocks 2 to 3 times in a cycle. Fit it in as it can fit in. Don't be overly, it has to be exact, but that is a high uh, response way to build durability. Now let's talk about, well, I should never say that too. Adding a long effort to that is
Mm.
also highly impactful, particularly if it's the last day. Go a little easier, go a little longer, because you'll still get the high TSS. You can go a little easier, but a deeper duration becomes the stimuli. That's a great way to close a block. Um, Workouts themselves, I would generally tend to work at threshold, sub-threshold works with occasional bouts over. If you're doing longer events where durability really is a driver, you do want to maintain some anaerobic capacity. You do want to occasionally do some, lactate tolerance. You're still going to use fast switch muscle fiber in these longer events when you fatigue. So you need to keep them a little, but you don't need a ton. I would focus on a lot of sub um, threshold tempo work, things like that, sweet spot, and zone, plenty of zone two, obviously. But here's a trick, and this is one of the things I like the most in those blocks is parabolic workouts.
Mhm.
So you're doing some efforts early in the workout to accelerate fatigue. So you're setting up the system, particularly for those with a little time limit in their training. And then you're doing something later to have a demand to help you resist the fatigue and maintain neuromuscular or muscular resiliency and neuromuscular coordination. Then I'll give you one final trick. Do the same effort. So if you're going to do 30 minutes of tempo early, do 30 minutes of tempo late. If you're going to do 2 times 20 SST early, try to do 2 times 20 SST late. Maybe do them as 2 times 15 early and late. Why? It gives you an excellent way to compare what's happening to you under fatigue. If you're executing the same type of steady state interval, generally steady state interval like sweet spot or tempo, you can compare like, wow, I knocked these out at 200 watts early in the workout and I felt great. And late in the workout, I couldn't reach 180 and I felt like crap. Then you have to ask yourself, was I hitting my fueling targets? How was I doing? If you see a pattern of that big, I'm much better early than late, you really need to work on your durability. If you're
Mhm.
pretty close or it's improving, then the work is improving it. And that's what you're looking for.
Yeah. So a couple of things there. I mean, one, it's also really great mental training. So if you've never, if you're like, wow, I'm so like, I'm getting so strong,
Wait
I
a
can
minute,
do,
wait a minute, wait a minute. I need to interrupt you. Is great really the word?
yeah,
Not every day. Sometimes
right.
it's painful mental training, but that's the point.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so many times athletes are again focused on like the early intervals. And yes, I'm progressing. Yes, my numbers are great. They're as expected. I can finish my endurance ride and I'm gonna check, call that a successful workout. But then you shift or you add in this parabolic format early and late intervals. Well, the early ones you're still nailing, but the late ones are just, they're a struggle. So two things. One, most likely I'm going to say it's fueling related, but also if you're not mentally strong and mentally um, committed to the idea of like, I'm going to have to also push a hard effort later in the ride after I've been riding for 2 to 3 hours or whatever, you know, that's an important piece to work on. You can easily fall apart, even if you've been fueling, if you've been training, you've been doing your riding, but if you're not like mentally committed to also go hard later, you can't expect yourself to be, have durability or be able to perform late in a race. So I think, part of why we include the workouts that we do early is to build that expectation of yourself. Like I'm doing progressive endurance now, where I'm starting a little easier and I'm finishing harder, or we're including tempo at the end of the ride. So just the idea that like that's the approach we want to take to build durability. Now we expand that. We're doing harder efforts later in the ride as well as earlier in the ride. We're fueling, at maybe 90 grams of carbs an hour, where before we were okay at 60 because we only were going hard early in the workout. But now in order to be able to do the work later, it requires more. And I would be okay with eating more than you think. If, don't be so tied to these targets like, oh, I'm only doing a 2.5 hour ride. I don't need 90 grams of carbs an hour, or I'm not gut training yet. I don't need 90 to 100 grams of carbs an hour. If you feel like you need that to have a good quality interval later in the workout, then do it. And we'll talk more about like how do you track or measure progress and performance, but don't get so focused on, you know, am I eating more than I need to? Probably not. You probably need to be eating more to build this durability. And that's what's going to allow you to hit, 190 to 200 watts in your sweet spot intervals later in the workout.
Yeah, you make such a good point. The mental game here is so big because it also translates so well to performance, right?
Yeah.
So I gave the idea of parabolic. You do some work, some intervals early and some late. You could just do your intervals late too. That's not a, I like parabolic a little bit better, but we also do a lot of late interval fatigue resistance style. But here I'll give everybody an example. Let's say you were to do 2 times 15 sweet spot, early in the workout, then you're riding, 2, 3 hours, and then you're finishing with 2 times 15. The rate of perceived exertion is going to be, this is hard, 7 to 8 in the first ones. The first time you do a parabolic workout, it's going to be at 9, 10. The same, actually less power. I'll tell you right now, you'll do less power. It'll be 9, 10. The more you do parabolic workouts, the more the RPE will come down. Like the
Mhm.
more your body will just adapt to the load you're asking it to. And when here, and I say not only your body, because you'll become stronger, your mind becomes stronger. You get more use to like every stress, your body adapts to whatever stress you put at it. And if suffering late in a ride and you're training that through this type of parabolic express, your body's going to adapt to that and get used to it and be able to deal with it better. Your mind's going to get better at it and get used to it and be able to deal with it. So it also, goes beyond just the physiology or the physiological benefit. So, Maria, that's such a great point to make.
It's also, I just want to like give credit to our base camp athletes. I mean, I saw this. We were just in Mallorca for training
Yes.
camp. And I see it when I go to events and I see our athletes there, like they get this. And, it's not that they're just like pacing themselves so conservatively, but they are trained physically and mentally to be able to um still have really good, strong outputs, and they
Yep.
and they know that, later in the ride or later in the race. And it's a key element that I see as a differentiator from, other athletes out there. They're not as mentally strong or physically strong later. And I think that's a testament to they've been working on the mental game. They've been working on, you know, the progressive endurance, the fatigue resistance workouts, the parabolic, the nutrition, the strength, all of it. And you can see it. And, I just want to recognize that, if you're listening and you are at our camp or you're at these races with us, like we see it and it's real. It works.
Agreed.
So let's talk now about how do we know it's working? It's kind of a different metric or a bunch of different things that we can track. So if we're, as a coach or if we're self-coached, how do we know that we're improving? And, what is the rate of improvement we're looking for?
So I'm going to start out with a strange statement that is probably good for a lot of people to hear. because we tend to just not trust our feelings. Like we have so much doubt. So here's my answer number one. When you know, you know. Like
Mhm.
you do feel it. I honestly think, like, if I was to go out and do 8 FTP tests a year, they all feel the same. Like I'm bleeding out of my eyeballs, my tongue's hanging out, life sucks, I'm questioning all my decisions, whatever, right? Those feel the same in the moment. As your durability improves and you're thinking about like your longer rides every Sunday or whatever you're doing, you actually do feel it. Not every ride, it's never a perfect linear thing, but you tend to just feel better, finish stronger, smoother, more in control. You're not as wrecked. Like, and
Mhm.
you just know sometimes just, and I see so many people, I've had this dialogue a million times. Like, I think I should have counted it because there should be a million times. I do feel better, but I need some other validation. Like, start with that one. Like, you were faster, you were better. I was talking at our camp, somebody who had done our big climbing day up Sakalabra, and they got home like 45 minutes faster than last year, and they felt better throughout. And actually, we're like, I could have went harder, but how do I know? Am I just fitter? Like, how do I know? Like, what numbers should I be looking at? And I'm like, none. Like you kind of just validated like you were faster, stronger, felt better. That is enough. So, overarching concept, this is why durability is a hard concept to talk about because I can measure FTP in some form of a test. I can go out and do 20 or 40 or 60 minutes as hard as I can and figure it out. I can measure VO2 max in a lab on some type of ramp test and breathe into something and take some blood, right? Whatever, all different types of ways to measure. But when it comes to durability, we don't have that. So overall, trust your feelings. Two, this is another reason, like I just stated, I like parabolic. It actually gives you a pretty clean tracking of how things are closing in on itself. And to me, there is no greater indicator of performance than performance itself. So if you're training in a way like you're doing 2 times 15 sweet spot or 3 times 20 sweet spot, depends on all your training, right? Or doing 1 times 30 minutes or 1 times 40 minutes of tempo early. Try to repeat that late, like make those parabolic workouts the same and just be comparative throughout. You can do that in the winter, a little bit. You want to do it more in the spring and things like that summer when you get into performance phase, but it just simply compare your pre-fatigue and your post-fatigue workouts. And then if they're different, eliminate reasons like, oh, that's right, I didn't eat all day. Like make sure that the environment is the same, like you fueled. That's why I want you to put your fueling targets, stack them in your workout, have it in there just like a power target. So you know that it's apple to apple comparison. When it does come to metrics, you can look at decoupling rates. Like when do you decouple in the workout, particularly if you look at the second half, how much decoupling is going on. You can look at cardiac drift, to me is a little bit of a better number, in WKO5 to look at. But these are signals, but no, they're noisy signals, particularly in the spring when a lot of us are training durability because the weather's changing. It's getting hotter and hotter. And that could be one of the kind of key things that introduces noise into that signal, which can mislead you. Um, I think just observing, like one of the things you can do is mentally or even physically record RPE for the first half of your rides versus the second half and wait to see if those numbers will come together as you build this type of capacity, as you build this type of fitness. Um, the So it's softer, it's a little more
Mhm.
esoteric of a measurement. And I'm going to circle back and close on it because it's so important. But you need to trust your feelings. Like I'm faster, I feel better, but I looked at my Strava file and maybe I didn't quite have the right amount of power. Or I looked at my Training Peaks file and there was no peak 20-minute in there. That's okay. Like
Mm.
trust your feelings. And when you know, you'll know.
I just had this conversation with one of my athletes who is at Mallorca camp with us, and she trains for like ultra distance stuff. And she was focusing on like, oh well, I felt so good this camp, and I felt like I was riding stronger, and but like my climb times, I only hit one climb PR this year. And I'm like, I clearly remember talking to you last year, and every day you were just wrecked after the ride. Like you could barely walk, like get out of your room. And you're like night and day different person this year. So it is, I think I don't know why it is. Like there's objective data and there's subjective, and we always put more stock into the objective for some reason. But the subjective to me is so important, and I hope that, athletes, I think athletes who do lean into the subjective and trust that, like, do have I don't know, like a stronger sense of like confidence when they go into an event. And I think, learning to, like you said, like just trust that is pretty key, especially, for a concept like durability. Um, One final point on the environmental, as we're going into warmer, hotter, and humid months, maybe your key events are going to be in the heat of the summer or something, looking at decoupling as a metric, if you are also focusing on your fueling, make sure you're also addressing your hydration too, because that is adjacent to fueling a key part of being able to have good RPE and have good numbers later in the ride. The more that you're sweating, the more that you're losing um, from a hydration standpoint, hydration and electrolytes or fluid and electrolytes, that's also going to impact your strategy for these longer rides, and it'll affect your decoupling. And I would say have your plan to have your carbohydrate intake per hour, have your fluid intake per hour, and your sodium as well. That's all going to impact, again, how you're going to feel and how you're going to perform later. So just a side point on that. But yeah, I mean, I think really good points here. I hope that athletes take this emphasis off of FTP and can sort of understand that it's more than that, and they, trust their feelings that they are feeling like they're getting stronger. They probably are. Maybe that 20-minute number hasn't moved a lot, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that gains aren't being made in other areas.
Agreed.
So anything to add?
No, I think that's a good. I mean, this is a complex. Like it's fun. We have talked about it today. We've oversimplified certain things. I mean, the complexity drives from the reality. And I'm just going to close on the statement for me: metabolic stability, neuromuscular control, muscular resilience. You're putting all of those together. That goes beyond FTP. That goes beyond just a metabolic focus. And I think it's so important that we understand why. Here's, because it will help us. And I'm not saying like, wow, let go of FTP and I'm just going to let it go down 50 watts. That won't happen if you're training well. I mean,
Hmm.
just don't make it the marker of success because that leads to doubt. Well,
Mhm.
maybe my durability is going up, but my FTP went down 3.5 watts. I'm just not ready to race. I just can't do it. That's where I see the over reliance on FTP and under reliance on building and then feeling the durability confidence matters.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, good stuff. Thanks everyone for listening. For more coaching content and information on our coaching programs, including our expert guided one-on-one coaching, visit us at joinbasecamp.com. Our mission at Basecamp is to empower and educate you, the athlete, and to provide a training and learning community for the seasoned racer and newer rider. For more content like this, sign up for our monthly newsletter with free training, nutrition, strength, and mental performance tips at joinbasecamp.com. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.